You know, when a child finally gets a diagnosis, it can feel like a huge relief, like you finally have an answer. But what if that answer is, well, just a label? A single word trying to define a whole complex person. Today, we're going to dig into the big debate around these labels, when they're a massive help, when they might actually do some harm, and why this whole conversation matters now more than ever. So let's just jump right into the big question that seems to be on everyone's mind. It feels like more kids are being diagnosed with learning, behavior, and emotional issues than ever before. So what's going on here? Are we just getting way better at spotting these things? Or is something else driving this trend? Well, it turns out the answer is complicated. It's not just one thing. There are all these different forces at play. You've got schools under enormous pressure, where a label can unlock needed resources. For parents, a diagnosis can feel like the very first step toward getting real help. It also gives everyone, from doctors to teachers, a kind of shorthand, a common language to talk about the issues. And for the family, it can turn what feels like chaos into a challenge with a name. And for the child, it can be a massive, massive relief. Okay, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll start by looking at this big rise in labeling. Then we'll make the case for a label and then flip it and look at the hidden costs. We're going to dive into a really fascinating real-world example with the dyslexia debate, unpack the different ways stigma shows up, and then try to answer that big question: what's really in a name?
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, the rise of labeling. Now, on one hand, getting the right diagnosis can absolutely change a child's life for the better. But with this trend comes a really big risk: getting it wrong. A false positive isn't just a simple mistake. When a kid gets mislabeled, the fallout can be serious and stick with them for a long, long time.
So keeping that risk in mind, why are so many people actively seeking out these labels? That brings us right to section 2, the case for a label. Because you see, for a lot of families, a diagnosis isn't a burden. Not at all. It's the key that finally unlocks the door to understanding and shows them a clear path forward. I mean, just think about it for a second. Before you have that diagnosis, a child's struggles can feel completely random, confusing, and just overwhelming. But the moment you give that struggle a name, whether it's autism or OCD or anything else, it suddenly becomes something you can get your hands on. It's not this mysterious fog anymore. It's a concrete problem you can start to research, understand, and finally, actually do something about. And this quote from a parent, wow, it just gets right to the heart of it. They said that labeling their child changed our children from bizarre to different. Just let that sink in. The behavior didn't magically change overnight, but the understanding of that behavior did. What might have looked like a bad kid is suddenly seen through a completely new lens. That is a powerful, powerful shift. And what about the kid themselves? The diagnosis can create this really crucial space between their identity and their struggle. Instead of that internal voice saying, "I'm dumb" or "I'm lazy," they can start to understand, okay, I have a condition that makes this specific thing harder for me. It separates who they are from the challenge they're facing, and that can be an absolute game changer for their self-worth. But of course, it's not always that straightforward, because a label isn't just a key. Sometimes it can feel more like a cage. So now we have to flip the coin and look at the other side: the hidden costs, the unintended consequences that can come with a diagnosis. And some of these downsides are really serious. A label can become so big that it completely overshadows the child's personality. People stop seeing the kid and only see the diagnosis. It can also lead to this rigid all-or-nothing way of thinking, when we all know most of these issues exist on a spectrum. Even worse, a well-meaning teacher might subconsciously lower their expectations, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. And maybe the scariest part: what if the label is actually hiding the real problem, like a chaotic classroom or even just chronic lack of sleep, and leads down a path of medication that was never the right answer to begin with? Okay, to see how this all plays out in the real world, we're going to dive into the surprisingly intense debate over one very specific label: dyslexia. This is a perfect case study to see just how high the stakes can get. So, first things first, what exactly is dyslexia? Well, the general definition is that it's an inherited, brain-based issue that makes processing language, especially reading and spelling, incredibly difficult. And it's so important to remember this. It has absolutely nothing to do with how smart someone is. Okay, this is where the fight really heats up. On one side, you have critics who argue that the word dyslexia is just too vague. They ask, if the interventions that help dyslexic kids also help all struggling readers, then why are we creating this special, exclusive category? It seems unfair to them. But then the advocates on the other side push back, and they push back hard. They say, look, just because we're still hammering out the details doesn't mean the condition isn't real. They argue we actually need more diagnoses to get help to more kids, and that the label is a vital shield against those awful, unfair judgments like being called lazy or stupid. And this whole debate brings us to what is maybe the biggest, most damaging hidden cost of any label: stigma. It's such a powerful force, but it's not just one single thing. It actually shows up in three very different, very distinct ways. Okay, so first, there's public stigma. This is when society as a whole holds negative stereotypes, which can lead to things like rejection or bullying. Then, and this one is so insidious, there's self-stigma. This is when a child starts to actually believe those negative stereotypes about themselves. They might blame their diagnosis for every single failure and never give themselves credit for their successes. And finally, there's something called courtesy stigma. This is when that negative judgment spreads to the people closest to the child, like parents and especially moms getting blamed for their child's condition. So, after looking at all of this, the benefits, the costs, the very real human impact, we're kind of back where we started. What is a diagnostic label, really, when you get right down to it? It really is a double-edged sword, isn't it? On one side, it's a key that can unlock understanding, resources, community, and so much relief from self-blame. But on the other side, it can be a cage of stigma, stereotypes, lowered expectations, and maybe even missing the true cause of the problem altogether. It's a powerful tool, but it's also a potential trap. This quote from author Joanne Limburg really just says it all. She wrote that fighting a named enemy is nothing like as enervating as trying to fight yourself. And that's it, right there. A diagnosis can take the fight from being an internal battle against yourself and turn it into an external one against a known condition. It lets you fight an enemy you can see instead of just fighting your own reflection. And that really leaves us with one final and I think crucial question. We've seen just how thin the line between helping and harming can be. So the question we all need to keep asking for every single child is this: when does a label stop being a helpful tool and start becoming a restrictive box? The material we explored today was drawn from resources provided by the Center for Mental Health in Schools at UCLA.